First of all, thank you to Mr. Griffith. As you can see, through his stewardship and leadership the last several years, he's put the finances of the district in a great position. And it's from that position that I wanted to talk to the board tonight about some opportunities, and most specifically, opportunities for students. And this is, what I'm about to propose to you is driven from the strategic planning process we went through over a year and a half ago with the community. And some of the pieces that came out of that was a sense of lost blank spots, blind spots, diluted spots that represent opportunities for kids in terms of academic programs. And so we sit today in a position where, as you can see from the fund balance and the 5-year forecast, the opportunities that are there with some possibilities. So I kind of want to walk through a couple pieces of that. For the last several years, dating back to the previous board, the decision was made to do something that keeps us accountable to the public, keeps administration accountable to the board as it relates to money spent, finances used for staffing. As you know, our enrollment projections for the last couple of years have been fairly flat. So we haven't experienced much need or much push for additional staff to address enrollment increases, which is typically what you see is enrollment increases. Olentangy would be a great example of that, where enrollment increases drive you to staffing to keep numbers low. And we're not really in that position, nor do our enrollment projections indicate that that's going to be the case. So right now we function, and Ms. Griffith referenced it in his slide, a $450,000 annual allocation to be used for staffing. That number has oftentimes been referenced as 10 FTE, full-time equivalent, and meaning about $45,000 per person. Well, depending on the kind of position you're looking at, that may be more than enough or less than enough. It should be noted as well that the 450 doesn't include the benefit side, but in Mr. Griffith's forecast, correct me if I'm wrong, he accounts for that in the part of the budget where that would be accounted for. It's not absent of the 5-year forecast, it's in the 5-year forecast. So we've operated with that. And that served real effectively for us as an organization to sit down and talk about staffing and really whittle down where we need support on what we need to bring on board. And I think that's been effective. And as we stand here today, as we project forward for next year, using that allocation, that $450,000, if you ask me where we would have needs going into next year, you see the areas up here. And I apologize to the group out there, can't see where I'm pointing, but I'm looking at, there's a couple positions in special education. Most of those have to do with compliance issues and ratio of teachers to students that happen. And as we have, it's not necessarily that our special education population is increasing, it's the bubble that comes through with certain classes that move, okay? Elementary gifted is an area where we think we could make some more gains. We think there's some gaps there, particularly in the self-contained program, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders, in which we have had to look at the numbers of students into the program, we allow into the program, and that's been a function more of FTE, not necessarily of student scores on gifted tests. And so we think there's an opportunity there to create more opportunities for kids. Some of the staffing we knew all along for all-day kindergarten, particularly music, art, and PE. We continue to track this, and as I note up here, a portion of this, a good portion of this is offset by tuition revenue. Our all-day kindergarten revenue model projects if you have about 40% of the all-day kindergartners qualify for tuition waiver, you back out that 40%, our revenue generated by the rest of the student population still ranks at about $460,000. And that's at a 40% free and reduced lunch. As it stands right now, as we've reviewed the data, we're going to be a little bit, not significant, but less than that 40% unless something goofy happens in the next couple of days. So our projected revenue, our actual revenues are probably going to outdo our projected revenues for all-day kindergarten. So some of the costs for staff that are in here are probably going to get offset within that revenue. We have a couple little places. We have a need for 2 more crossing guards. These are part-time, not very expensive. This is, I'm going to guess, somewhere around a $6,000 cost annually to fill those spots where we need crossing guards. We'd like to increase the health aide hours. This is an opportunity for us to put more health aides, not nurses, but health aides in clinics across the district where we don't have coverage all day long in every building. So this is one way of increasing some coverage at some of our buildings by increasing their hours. And that's not more staff, that's just more hours to some of the staff we have currently. One of the interesting places, and I put this one on as a demonstration of how the staff is working within the confines of the money they have available for them to do things that we want to do as part of strategic planning, but doing it by looking at current resources and allocation. So within some of our title funds, the elementary division took a look at our use of title funds and reallocated some of those funds because they thought what we were doing with those weren't as effective as we'd like. So let's drop what we're doing we don't think's making the biggest bang for a buck. And where they'd like to put some funds is to pick up some guidance counselors to support the elementary program. I take you back to Tammy Santa's presentation a few weeks ago when she talked about the gap in elementary guidance counselors. Here's a way where our staff is looking at reusing money we have without going more in the general fund. So I put that up there because there's a lot of that that goes on as we redistribute jobs. So if we were to move forward next year, these are the areas where we think that $450,000 allocation to fill some needs. Some are mandatory, some are opportunities for kids, some are just operational. But after listening to Mr. Griffith's presentation, I'd ask you to think of a consideration for additional resources. And why? Fundamentally, the first piece is the strategic plan from the community points to community desire for more program, particularly locally developed curriculum. Much of what we have had to allocate our resources to, particularly in human resources, have been to areas that have functioned mostly as state mandates, federal mandates, either because of testing, resident educator, any of those components that we know of that have been coming in place that have effectively been unfunded mandates where we've had to allocate staff. And that leaves us with some blank spots in our curriculum that we felt we wanted to get at. And so here you have an opportunity, as Mr. Griffith showed, to look at our community's resources and our funds and an ability to meet some demands that they have said they like to have. Secondly, it just fundamentally goes about improving opportunities for students. That's the fundamental piece here. Talking about additional resources to provide staff and programs that make opportunities for kids. And I can quantify some of that for you as we go along. And the most important thing is we want to maintain a balance, and this again is in strategic planning, where the community said, if you're doing these things, do it in consideration of the 5-year forecast, which serves as your guidepost moving forward. And as you can see, there's kind of a bright light on that path from that 5-year forecast, particularly if you factor in, and you never like to, you never want to project before it's in your pocket, so to speak, but when you start to look at what's going to happen with the state budget to Westerville, what Mr. Griffith presented today might step up and is even better. And as that point, so I want to look at those components. Using that 5-year forecast as a measuring stick for me as superintendent, I wouldn't come here if I didn't think we could sustain the request against the 5-year forecast. We can maintain that. So why now? Well, here's what you saw this evening. We've got a 5-year forecast where our projected revenues are better than expected. We've seen improved efficiency, which has maintained expenditures and kept us on as a positive trajectory. You have the impact of retirement. We saw that this evening with all the teachers that are retiring and part of the STRS. You have the potential of an improved additional state resources that aren't accounted for right now. And what that leaves you at the end of the day is a healthy fund balance. And there's 2 forms of that in there. And Mr. Griffith, feel free to correct me anyway along the line. But as you know, as a board, you've directed the treasurer to set aside in the cash reserve $19 million, which represents about 45 days operating cash. And that money is set aside strictly for that. But on top of that, if you read that 5-year forecast carefully, I'd point to, for example, FY17, where in addition to the $19 million that you've set aside, you still have a cash balance of $59.7 million, which continues to grow. And if some of these other factors play in, they're going to get even bigger. And so you're in a position where you have dollars available. Let's do something for kids and create some opportunities for kids would be the why. At the start of the year, I made it my goal and shared with board leadership that I was going to spend some time this year with our leadership team reviewing various parts of our curriculum program where oftentimes these are blank spots, blind spots, things that we're not paying attention to because mandates have our eyes averted to another place. So example would be third grade reading guarantee. When we brought on reading teachers to meet the third grade reading guarantee, when we had to do with resident educator programs, all those pieces that we had to do kept us from paying attention to other parts. So I had various members of our administrative staff take time this year to review those programs, to look at staffing, to look at courses, to look at the number of kids taking them, and give us some reports back as a leadership team to tell us what we saw. And so these represent areas in our curriculum that folks have done presentations on, that we've looked at, where we think we have some pretty significant gaps and could create some opportunities for kids. And I didn't get into exact FTEs here because I think some of these, it would be preliminary to put FTE here until we have conversation at the building levels with teachers and principals to talk about how we beef it up if indeed we go down this direction. But I don't want to have those conversations, invite people to the table, talk about additional resources, unless I know I have something available to me to use as a guidepost. So these areas we've looked at, and I can give you some, I can quantify some of this for you in terms of the gap. So let's take secondary world languages. This year, through the scheduling process in high school where kids choose courses, we had approximately 150 students at the high school level who wanted to take American Sign Language who couldn't take it because we don't have enough FTE. We had another 40 students who can't take French because we don't have enough FTE. At middle school, we have roughly 126 middle school students who requested Spanish, and because of FTE, we can't do that. In art, it's really bad. We had 850 students who requested art on their schedule, and we can't fill the request because we don't have enough staff. So those are some examples. I can point to elementary gifted. Here, the self-contained program, where in one grade level, we're running 2 sections, which is about 50 kids. The other 2 grade levels, we're running 1 section. And the fact that we're only running 1 section means some kids whose score for the gifted would normally qualify them, but because we don't have enough FTE, we can't serve them. So there's lots of that within here. There's also places of growth as we continue to grow a College Credit Plus model. We've done some great work there. In our recent IB review from the external review, a couple of areas, they pointed out the secondary world language and the secondary fine arts, and that we have students enrolling in the IB program at South who, because of staffing, can't get into the courses necessary for the diploma program in world languages and fine arts. We also have spent time trying to figure out how to fulfill the mandate for an IB coordinator. At one point, we had a teacher who was part-time teacher, part-time coordinator, but in order to fill student requests, we put that person back to full-time teaching. We put the responsibilities of the IB coordinator, which are pretty heavy, particularly during testing time, which was with all the other testing time going at the same time. We put that in assistant principal at the high school. It's a pretty high level of demand. I also fundamentally believe that until we take an approach that IB is a district level program for high school students, and we package that way, and we deliver it that way, I think we're going to continue to have that program is going to underserve potential population of students. So creating some leadership there for recruitment, working with parents, working with teachers, working with the testing piece would be an area of interest. So these are some of the academic programs where we see opportunities for kids and for growth and making better programs. It's in the academic side. There's some operations and administration, not as heavy, mostly because for me it's student opportunities first. But there are some areas, for example, in custodians and maintenance. We've added buildings back in. We took a significant cut in our custodial staff during the levy campaign for the renewal, for the emergency levy in 12. We've left ourselves a little bit short there over time, and actually our staffing level there is below the recommendations that came from an audit prior to that cut year. So there are places where we could pick up some extra help and address that. There are also some areas of supervision. You know, you don't think about these things, In fact, they don't even tell you these in superintendent schools some days. But things like playground inspection for safety, bleacher inspection for safety. And I was in Bexley when the St. Charles stands fell apart, and remember seeing that, the onset of that. And I know we have a very enthusiastic student section in most of our high schools that put a lot of pressure on our bleachers. So these are places where we've lost support and have put responsibilities on folks, but they kind of represent important areas that we probably want to take a look at and see if we can do some work there. Excuse me. Support staff, again, is another area we've particularly in the buildings, when you think of some of the work that, when you cut back one support staff member at a building, the work doesn't go away, it just shifts to someone else's desk. Then add the mandates, and I can tell you testing season this spring was part of that, where all of a sudden the workload in those offices get to be pretty heavy. Those are some places. IT, as we continue to support the teaching and learning roadmap, we want to make sure we have the right infrastructure in place, safety, security. Mr. Byrd, you'd be interested, we had a conversation today about cyber insurance protection. You have to fill me in. English as a second language is an area where we have struggled to improve performance for several years. And I think fundamentally we're at a point where we're really got to take a look at the leadership model there. I think the people who are in charge of it want to do good work. I'm not so sure that we have the right resources there to move the needle. And that becomes important as we start looking at data and the gaps. So those are some areas, nothing too hefty there. Two other minor ones. I'm in favor and would recommend bringing back department facilitators at the secondary level. Fundamentally, we need to increase teacher voice in our curriculum instruction program. And by removing that leadership at the building level, we've diminished principals' abilities at the secondary level to get feedback from teachers about what's working in the classroom. At a time period in which our teachers have fundamentally experienced significant change in the content that they teach, the design of that content, the implications for instruction, and most importantly, the assessments that become a big part of their accountability and our accountability. And I think it's not an expensive venture to add some leadership there and boost teacher opportunities to help us understand where we need to be to help kids. Nurses piece is just, again, looking at some additional time. You talk about medically fragile children and coverage and the heyday, the busy day of any school, having those clinics covered more than we do now is part of that, and the paperwork that comes with it. There shouldn't be, from an operations standpoint, if you're a fourth grade teacher who inherits a child who's got bee sting or peanut allergies, you don't want to wait 2 weeks to get the notification from the nurse that you have a special child in your class who has significant medical needs. And so, yeah. So making sure that we have appropriate staffing there so we can deliver services and support kids in classrooms is important. So those are some areas that we have seen as blank spots, weak spots that we think could be boosted. So what does that mean? What I'd ask tonight is consideration if you look at that 5-year forecast. Currently, you're allocating $450,000 each year through the 5-year forecast. What I'm asking for this evening is a consideration to increase that for the next 2 years and then return it back to its $450,000 mark in the 5-year forecast in the third year. And I'd like to be able to have the opportunity to use that additional funds, which would mean over 2 years where we'd normally spend 2 times 450, 900,000. I'm talking about 2 times 900,000 over the next 2 years, 1.8 million. It's an additional $900,000 allocation over the next 2 years in your 5-year forecast. 800,000 of which was made up just between the difference between projected revenues and expenditures that Bart saw this evening. And I do that having spent lots of time talking with Mr. Griffith and looking at our 5-year forecast and thinking about the long-term implications of that. Here's what I think it does for you. It keeps you in the, it keeps us in the public eye in terms of what we're allocating for staff during a time of enrollment, flat enrollment. It keeps us in a position to add some programming back that the community said is important to kids. It always means, as we look at five-year forecasts, because you'll do this again in October, that if we're seeing the forecast take a dip in a different direction for whatever reason, we can make modifications. So it's not an open checkbook. It's a opportunity for us to do some work. And I present it that way as 1.8 over the next 2 years because honestly, we need the opportunity, and we need it now, to be able to go back and talk with teachers and principals about what can we do immediately. Because if you're a high school principal or a middle school principal, your master schedule is about in the books, which means your teaching assignments and the kids' schedules. And if you've never done a master schedule, the second you plop in another teacher, you disrupt the whole process and you're back to square one. At the middle school level, when you start adding electives, et cetera, that changes the rotation in their building, all those pieces. So there are places where we could beef up and add tomorrow and meet kids' needs and not do any of that with limited conversation. There are places where we need conversation throughout next year, but what does that mean for opportunities for kids and what's the best way to do that? So I'm not looking at it as 900, I'm looking at it as 1.8 over 2 years that we could do to fill some of those gaps. So, and continue to use that five-year forecast as a monitoring tool. Lot to digest. I appreciate the time I've had to present this evening and the time I've had to talk with you over the last couple of weeks, and happy to take any questions.
Who's going first?
Go ahead. I've got,
You got a bunch?
no,
Oh,
not really.
John, thank you. You answered several of the things that I was going to ask, but there are some pieces that are missing from the presentation tonight, and I would like to get a sense from you as regards when or if you plan to address issues around facilities and transportation. A lot of the pieces that we see in your presentation are putting back components and opportunities that have been missing from the district for some time, putting them back sometimes in different ways, but providing the opportunities that are necessary. But there are some things missing. What do you want to do about that?
So I'll talk about facilities first because we actually, as we looked at a healthy five-year forecast, the board did some fixing to that earlier this year when we did the Point View project and you moved money from the permanent improvement funds back to the general fund. Mr. LaRose picked up additional dollars out of that. Now then immediately the first 2 years of that went back to Point View, which we're happy to do. The other side is transportation, which is an area, particularly within our athletic department, that I'm concerned about. So I would like to, in weighing out what to bring to the table as we look at the impact in the five-year forecast, I would like to, in the fall, visit both those issues. I'd like to have Mr. Reeves in the fall come back and talk about the transportation issue and the budgets as it relates to athletics. Bob Lynn to talk a little bit about where we are. And actually, sorry, I'm a little over the map on this one. If we back up, last year you approved shortening the walking distances to the bus stops. So I do think that's an area we want to look at. Where I think it's most impactful is athletic transportation, where at this time we're not transporting both ways in a lot of instances, and I think we're leaving some families in tough spots. The facilities piece, I'd like to revisit again next year as we get Point View rolling. We can look at the five-year forecast again in October and in May to see if the board feels there's room and if Mr. Griffith feels there's room to make additional allocations to Mr. LaRose so we can address some issues there, because there are some weak spots there. But I felt that this time in weighing out where to go next, we did some facilities, improved that, feel good about that, felt there was time for opportunities for kids.
So $1.8 million over the 2 years. There are an awfully lot of needs that grew out of the crisis that the district was going through, the additional responsibilities that we have as regards what we need to do with the state and so forth. So how confident are you that this particular approach, this 1.8, will actually, when it's added to the 450, will be sufficient to meet the needs that you've identified?
It's a great question because it's a ceiling question. And what I know is that there's always more we can do for kids. And, but at the same time, you have to do that given the resources available to you through the community. And the community's been very generous, put the renewal in place. The state's improving the direction they go. So this is a conservative approach early on to see what opportunities we can create and where that leaves us next. So I would say to you, there's a ton of opportunities we could do. But this gives us a 2-year plan that can be revised anytime during the 2 years, and at the end of the 2 years, see where we're at, and we can revisit the conversation about where we're at and where we want to go. Whether or not, we also need to keep an eye on enrollment projections and make sure that those hold still. So it's a conservative step in the right direction, but it won't satisfy everybody.
So as you've looked at these positions and as you've considered where you want to go and who you want to talk to about this, have you looked at redistribution and reallocation of existing positions?
We've been doing that for the last 2 years, making changes at the elementary level in particular, for example, where using current staff and retirement opportunities. Barb Wallace and her team have plans in place so that next year every single elementary will have an instructional coach, a professional teacher who will have the opportunity to work with teachers in the classroom with job-embedded PD on professional development. It's a known, research-based, outcome-based professional development model that we think adds value. And so we went in that direction. Why do we do that? Because as we looked at our 3rd grade reading scores and our reading program overall, we felt that we had the opportunity to move some of those staff and not really upset performance. So we went in that direction. The guidance counselor for elementaries I showed this evening is another example of the kinds of places we do that. As we look at PE, the board approved the policy that allowed the PE waiver at high school for athletics, which over time is going to have an impact on PE enrollment at the high school, creates an additional opportunity as we have retirements there for reallocation of those either to PE in the middle school, or other kinds of position like business programs that we want to add. So we're always got an eye towards shifting things around to meet demands and needs as the playing field changes. So those are a couple examples.
You made a couple of points I think are really important. You talked about the negative impact that the cuts over the past few years had on our secondary as well as on our elementary. But when you start laying out the numbers of kids who cannot get in those courses, it's kind of disingenuous to say we offer courses that we know we have no likelihood of staffing. And this brings us back to where we need to be with that. The other point that I thought was extremely important to consider as we look at the list is your comment about filling our full-time gifted classes with kids who obviously hit the score, but knowing that there were a number of kids who hit the score that we couldn't put into the classes, even though they needed that particular level of instruction because we didn't have the staff. That is unacceptable in so many ways when we talk about meeting the needs of kids. You also talked about the generosity of the community. That is very true. The community has been remarkably generous, but it's not just blind generosity. You know, if you think about what the community has done, they have stated the people who participated, many people who participated in the creation of the strategic plan. They laid out very clearly for us what they expect this educational system to look like. When the people of this community decided to vote in favor of the levy that we've been talking about so much tonight, they did that making their opinions very clear to us about what kind of educational system they expected. So for us to sit on the funds and not spend the funds that the community said they wanted spent on what they wanted it spent on seems to me to be this sounds very, very melodramatic, but I do believe this. It is almost to the point of malfeasance. It's holding the dollars with the direct intentionality of not spending them for what the people of the community said they wanted and what we said we would give them. Your plan moves us to where we need to be. It gives our students the things that they need to have, as many of them as we can give them, and it meets what the community said that it wants from its school system, and does it well within the bounds of what we're talking about with a 5-year forecast, without even considering the increases that we are likely to see but have not yet been guaranteed. So, Bart, my last question is, John said that this fits within the sustainability. As I look at your documents, it fits within the sustainability. Do you believe this plan fits within sustainability?
I do. Like I said, this state right now favorably, we're roughly at 7.5%. And so that's roughly, what do I say, $2 million a year. Cumulative, that's close to $20 million a year. John and I talked about this earlier. We also took the $3 million into account from what we said we were going to move from the permanent improvement back in here. We also played with those numbers and from what the state is doing increase-wise, what we think maybe potentially insurance-wise, instead of being 10% next year, maybe you're at 5 or someplace else. I just played with those numbers, and we're pretty much where we said we would be in 5 years anyway. having spent as much cash balance where we would said we would be in 5 years. So even spending that money, it really much offsets what we're receiving extra on top of that. So in 2019, we're pretty much going to have the same cash balance where we thought we would be anyway, even spending with what John's talking about, even with moving the $3 million in from the capital outlay in, but taking in consideration what we think we're going to receive from the state. So yeah, the numbers are there. It makes sense to try it. Like I said, if it doesn't work, and keep in mind, John's 2-year plan is for fiscal year 16 and fiscal year 17. Fiscal year November of 16 is a potential renewal levy. So if we don't have a sense of what that levy is going to do for us in November of 17, he may want to pull the reins back a little bit. I mean, for at least 1 year, you can try it. In the second year, there's some considerations you've got to look at because you're going to potentially ask for a levy renewal in November of 17, which is in the middle of John's second year. So we'll have to see what the community thinks about that.
Yeah. Thank you, Bart. Thank you, John.
Let me just follow up with Nancy's questions. A couple of them where she's already asked that I was thinking about. And I want to say thank you for thinking, in advance and anything that we can do to help our students, our children improve the opportunities that certainly we do need to get some of those back. Especially, I keep hearing from the taxpayers about the middle school. We weren't doing enough. We kind of took away from them maybe too much. And so a lot of them had 2 study halls. Well, that's unacceptable for middle school students. They're lucky to sit still for 1. But so at any rate, hopefully, I know that we may not be able to do all of these things. I'm thinking that you're probably looking at what we need, prioritize them and so on. And my concern on the 2-year issue is that, after 2 years, then what? That's my only big concern. We don't want to just, take on and bite so much off that we can't chew it for a long period of time. We don't want to take anything away. So that, and I know you're keeping that in mind, along with working with Bart in terms of, in case, the levy doesn't get renewed, then we're at an issue. But certainly we need to do some more for the students and offer some of these opportunities. And it's the money's there, and you're only asking. I'm assuming you're not thinking that you can cover all of those issues with $900,000. Okay. The whole list. Each year. So that's my only concern as a board member, that we don't give and then have to take away again.
I think that's an important point when you tie the cycle of the levy renewal and then that Bart refers to. I do, and I, from what Dr. Nestor Baker said, as I put the whole thing together, if you look at strategic planning, the members who participate, over 300, said more opportunities for kids. The phrase "more than core" was something that came out of that. And so you have the resources to meet that need. You then think about that in terms of the community's perceptions of a renewal, no new taxes, sustain where we're at. And if you look at what the impact of the renewal is, because in Bart's official forecast, you got to back it out.
Right.
But if you plop it back in and you look at 18 and 19, the expenditures and revenue things looks a whole lot different going on out. So you go to 12 was a emergency levy, renewal in 17, no new taxes. You're putting yourself in a position for long-term from 12 on out of not having to look for any additional dollars, no new millage for maybe 8, 9, 10 years. Well, you did an emergency, said be good for 5. You stretch 5 to 7 or 8, and put some things back in place for kids, opportunities for kids, and take care of some infrastructure needs, some building needs. I think you've shown good stewardship to the community and positioned yourself nicely.
Right. And I like to justify the 19 million that is on the reserve. I mean, it's like having your own checkbook where you have a savings, and it's only good for 45 days. But at least we have finally established that, and I feel good about that. So that's something that I feel like we shouldn't touch unless it's an emergency. Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate all your thoughts that went into this.
So if I can harp on the economics of the operating reserve for just a second, because I want to tie this back into something we're very familiar with. I know that we talked a little bit at kind of the personal checking account, but there's a very interesting behavior of money. One, if you work in the corporate sector, you're very familiar with, which the personal example of this is that how many of you have ever experienced when your checking account at some point in your life was down to your last $27? That's when your car breaks. Right? Or that's when the furnace goes out, and that's when there's crisis, right? And yet, when you have money in the bank, it seems that money follows money, that opportunity follows, and when the roof needs to be redone, there's not a wringing of hands in deciding whether or not you're going to choose to eat or put the roof on, right? Having that operating reserve is what gives us the financial leverage, and one thing you know about money is that if your finances are healthy, they don't stay healthy as long as you continue to stay diligent and stand true on your principles, which for us is a 5-year plan. They get healthier, right? And that's what we're operating from. When I look at the plan, I'm actually a little bit concerned, echo a little bit about some of my fellow board members' positions, but a little bit more, I guess, more bluntly. And that would be that I feel like we may be being conservative to the point of being constrictive. I'm, not to throw a monkey wrench into the discussion, but I'm more inclined to see a figure on that short-term increase on a 2-year increase at the $600,000 level. I've gone through the numbers. I've gone through the 5-year plan. It's absorbable. I do need to agree with Dr. French about, we have to keep an eye on that post 2 years, right? And what does that look like? And do all of these potential positive windfalls, fall in line, right, so that we can continue to operate? But when I talk to the community, what we hear consistently is gifted and talented, IB, and supporting services, particularly around guidance counselors. And this is what the community wants. And I think what's really, really important here in this discussion and talking about this increased discussion is that this board has shown itself not to be resigned to the issues that are being caused by us being constrained in core curricula, from the state and from the federal government, right? Because what we focused on is outside of those demands, what does the community want? Because we have our hand on the rudder for the school district in being able to steer it in a way that our community wants their students to be taught, the type of programming that they want, right? And that means that we don't put all of our focus, all of our money, all of our effort into that core. We focus on those things that differentiate us as a district. And all of these components are outside of that discussion, right? And all of these components will add value to our students, to our families, and our community, because it's what they're asking for. Back to Nancy's statement. This is what our community, what our parents and our teachers are asking for. I think it's really incumbent upon us to deliver. I think 450 is a little light. The differentiator for me is that, back to an important term that you use, stewardship, we go back nearly 15 years on an audit, and the state said that, 60% of our building fleet should be replaced, We have maintenance issues, we have things that we need to stay on top of that give the right educational, universe for our students in the physical facilities. We need to put some attention into those. I would like to see us, pushing, the holistic plan, that's inclusive of all staff functions to make sure that, we're delivering exactly what the community is asking for.
Too many notes. I'm not going to go over all of them. I do appreciate, Carol, your emphasis, and Richard, you picked it up, that I really just dislike this, what would you call it, a boomerang kind of, put a few things out, a couple of years later, pull a few things back, put a thing. And I just think that's got to create craziness for teachers, staff, and students. My simple notes were, I said, okay, the community was involved in the creation of this strategic plan. The strategic plan helped to create some of these areas in which we want to focus on. I, too, feel a little bit that that we're almost not being bold and big enough. But that's not for me. That's not me saying to change the dollar amount. That's me saying let's try to move forward with perhaps this proposal, and see if we generate some exciting opportunities for children, for students. Students are, I think, excited when you touch different places in their core. And if there are that many students out there that get excited about education through artistic expression, I do not have an artistic bone in my body, but I love the people that do. I value so much the idea of creating more opportunities for our students. The only other piece that I had is that it seems to me that this is also creating support and encouragement for our staff and teaching corps as well, because we're saying what you do is so valuable. We want to provide more opportunity to support what you are doing. You talked about department heads and facilitators, or whatever kind of language. For out of our entire budget, $900,000 over 2 years. I'm with you absolutely on the 19 million. Hold it, and just keep that to the side in case our furnace breaks and all kinds of things occur. But I'm looking at the slide. I don't know which slide it is. Opportunities enhanced for academic programs. The 7-8 pieces there, and I am authentically excited to see the possibility of moving forward with some of these areas, and getting kids into programs that they want and that can enhance their educational experience, and supporting teachers and staff along that journey as well. Thanks.
Okay, I have a lot of thoughts, so I hope you can stick with me. First, when we create opportunities for these kids, we increase student achievement, which is why we are all sitting up here. That's what we want to do. So thank you for putting this list together. I like how it touches all the different levels. I will tell you, I can kind of go through here and I can see things when you say secondary, fine arts, and we now offer art just in 7th grade. I mean, it's not okay. So I agree with everyone else. I kind of wish we would shoot for the stars and ask for more. I think our kids deserve it. When I'm looking through here, some of these things, elementary gifted, definitely see expanding there. I also want to think down the road, we were talking about looking at things 2 years. So this program, we have 2 at the 4th grade level, 1 at 5th, 2 4th grades, 1 5th grade, 1 3rd grade. So would we be expanding 3rd and 5th? And if so, I think we need to be mindful of where it's housed and the building we're doing there, because then we would be talking moving kiddos, and it does concern me, so. Thoughts?
So that's where it goes back to, rather than prematurely recommending numbers of teachers and places, knowing what resources we have, what kind of dollars the board's willing to allocate to this, let's just go back and look at those variables. So when you think about the gifted self-contained program and its housing over at Emerson, classroom space there. Well, the other thing we have is we're adding first grade back to the magnet schools next year, so that's 3 classrooms. As we look at kindergarten, all-day kindergarten, we've had discussion about adding kindergarten. Doesn't make much sense not to have kindergarten at the magnet schools. Whether it's half day or all day is what we have to look at as we look at the all-day kindergarten program. Well, that's 3 classrooms. So actually, Mr. LaRose and I are scheduled tomorrow to go over to Emerson and Hamby to take a look at the inventory of classroom spaces that exist today to figure out how that all fits. So yeah, I mean, there's always ripple effects to space. We ran into that with the engineering design course at the middle schools. Actually, we ran into an interesting one where the equipment we needed to take off the fab lab couldn't fit through the door into the classroom. We had to do some modifications. That's one of those, you didn't think about that one at the time, and you kick yourself, but it happened. So that's why I think it's very important to be thoughtful and get the right people in the room to help with the planning and implementation. That includes teachers and principals, people like Jeff LaRose, facilities, so that we don't miss something or disrupt a potential opportunity down the line. I think that's an important piece. So to the point, I'll be at Emerson Hamby tomorrow counting classrooms to see how they're used.
And please know, I wasn't saying slow down. I was saying make it fit, but be mindful to the kids that are there and the ones that, potentially may have to find a new home. So, I think that's it for now. Do you have something else you were going to say?
So you are requesting a short-term increase, $450,000 each year over the next 2 years, but basically you're looking at the entirety of 1.8 million. Now, as we've discussed this, I heard Richard say he believes it should be $600,000 each year for, a more significant push forward. Tracy, I think I heard you say, do what we can do. So where I'm going now is, do we want to do a motion so that you know what you're doing? And if so, what do we want to move?
And the last time we did this quickly, we had to go back and do it again. So can we ask you to put something together?
Well, he's proposing are you
He
proposing
is, but we're also saying that I take it that we're okay with shoot for the stars. Let's figure out what you really do need.
Well, I don't
think she
know.
is
Did you hear me?
There's
Sustaining.
Allocate an additional
two-
$900,000 across 2 years.
Let's bite off a little instead of
I
biting
said,
off everything.
Let's,
So here's, and Bart, feel free to pipe in, as I understand how the logistics of this work. A resolution would certainly codify the request of some sort. On the other side is you're functioning within a 5-year forecast which has projection increases of $450,000. You're not wedded to that by any means. Where the other opportunity for the board to make decisions on staffing increases comes is when we bring positions forward for action. I think in terms of whether or not it's 450, 600, and when that happens, I would say somewhere in the middle of that is when I think about what we could do now on today's the 15th, right?
18th.
Right, with school closing up and master schedules going, is it the 18th? Did I
18th,
just know
yes.
there's a day I go to work and there's no buses on the road, and then there's a day I go to work and there's buses on the road, and so summer's over. So, I don't know, I don't know that how much more we would need.
So all you need is, we're assuming you're going to keep track of the 450 as you bring people forward for us to approve. You're keeping a tally?
Yes,
Yes, all right. So we're going to rely on you that you can do that. Do we need a motion?
No, keep in mind, sorry about the voice again, keep in mind, we're going to bring the final appropriations to the board in June 29th. And I would assume we could talk about doing staffing at that point so that when you pass the appropriations in June for next year, I'm sure Dr. Kellogg will have those items or those additional staffing in that appropriations package. We appropriate at the fund level.
Yes.
But Dr. Kellogg can certainly say at that meeting, hey, the appropriations include X number of dollars for whatever. And he can, because we really need to plan for that when we do the appropriations, not when we do the forecast. We'll have them in the forecast, but the appropriations should have what Dr. Kellogg wants to do for next year in those for June. So you really would have an opportunity in June. Dr. Kellogg could present, additional staff. He could certainly talk with all you guys, whatever, in future meetings to get an idea so that when we do present the appropriations to you at June 29th, that staffing will be part of that approval.
I think that's good. What I want to do is make sure that it is very clear publicly that we do want to see those dollars in appropriations, because boards change, times change, and I don't want you left hanging, believing you were following something that we wanted you to do, that then turned around and you ended up in a bad place because of it. So I want it to be clear that we have publicly said we want that in the appropriations. I think we've been pretty clear, haven't we?
It seems to me, all five of us have said that we want to move forward, providing additional opportunities, and we are taking this particular, it's not official proposal, this idea, and we're saying, we like this. Some are saying, hey, you know what, stretch that rubber band a little further. Some are saying, no, let's start where we are.
Yeah.
Let's start where we are. Bring to us a plan that has gone through some conversations with teacher staff, gone through some planning about prioritizing, and then if down the road were to come back and say, that was awesome, but it really should be 575. Well, then that's the discussion we have at that point. But I think all five of us, I'm not speaking for all five of us, I kind of am, but I think all five of us are saying we like the idea of seeing expanded opportunities, particularly in these areas which were driven by community involvement in the strategic plan.
And I think publicly, all five of us are saying that we will approve the 450,000 he's asking for. And, that's it at this point. We haven't agreed on anything else. So, for 2 years. And as I said, I'm concerned that we do the best we can do with that kind of money, 900,000 for each year, and see what we can do with that and hopefully sustain it for years to come. But who knows?
But don't you think when Bart just presented his projections?
I
don't you
understand,
think-
and now I hear Bart, and I talked to him too. Bart's looking good. I mean, we're looking
is looking
good. There's
good.
no
It's-
question as far as money.
He is looking good. So I look down this list and I see, arts need added, gifted in middle school. A lot of things need to happen in middle school. We just had 2 students, commit suicide. If we don't, we need guidance counselors, appropriate guidance counselors. I mean, there are so many things. Our libraries need to be open. We need media clerks.
Well, I think John has figured this out, and I do trust, when we talked, I do trust his ability to put, dollar figures together, and realize what it's going to cost us. And he knows where the priorities are, certainly. So
So-
I'm thinking that, we hired him to do the job, do it.
Yeah, give guidance, right, and that's the ask, but I think, I'm going to kind of come around, confirm, first of all, and I agree with you, Dr. French, confirm that the board is agreeing on the $900,000 figure as guidance, within which you operate, right, which is tied to the 5-year forecast. Look, I also would, there is a point that I have to disagree with you on, which is, all of us were incredulous about the possibility of meeting these programming needs with 900,000, right? I think everybody said there's some choices that are going to need to be made. So here would be my ask, right? Which would be, let's proceed with the agreement, which we're already at, with the $900,000 guidance. But I would like to see, as part of those discussions, and maybe it's later in the summer or getting into the fall period, in addition to Scott and Bob and those other areas, I would like to see what pieces of programming and/or operational support we are not achieving that are not meeting the strategic plan according to the feedback that we got from the community,
Yes.
right? You're going to have to make decisions within this 900K, right? There's going to be something that's left on the floor that the community is expecting. If we can have a discussion around the quantification of what that looks like, right? And then have that as a discussion additive to the 900K, I'm fine with that. But I think we all kind of shrank back when we saw it and said, there's no way that you're going to fill all of these programming needs and operational requirements in this 900K.
And I don't think that we are expected to do that. We're making an initial effort. We're
Yeah.
making a step, and we are going in the right direction.
Agreed.
We can't bite it off all in one big bite.
So if I'm hearing it correctly, moving forward, because the time periods between now and allocations, which is the June 29th meeting, is a critical time period for hiring. So if I'm hearing correctly, it would seem that I have guidance to move forward with an eye at 450 additional for this year. That will be reflected in the allocation that you're going to act on. If that number, for whatever reason, looks like it's going to be different than that, that additional expenditure shouldn't happen until additional board conversation. If at the end of the day, for next year, because we're talking about next year's allocation, because as I'm looking at it, and I've given thought to what I think we can do on May 18th for next year, if I got 600,000 today, I think it sounds odd, but I think it would be difficult for us to start filling some of those gaps for program opportunities. I want to be specific to that, without messing up, without appropriate planning. As we look at next year, where I have a time period for all these conversations, and we have time period for more of that, I think we're in a position to then say, and we have another look at the 5-year forecast, that might look different. But I wouldn't anticipate much different than 450,000 for next year at the time you do allocations in June.
Okay.
If so, I think I'm obligated at that point to say, the request is actually 600,000, here's why, but I probably shouldn't have hired on the assumption I was getting 600. I should hire on the assumption that 450 would be okay with the board. Is that,
That's right.
all right?
This is exciting, John. I am really excited about what you're going to do with the district.
I appreciate staff who have been, there are several people who individually spent a lot of time this year talking with teachers, talking to get input. I do know these are always dangerous things. I heard boomerang effect, I heard sustainability. I'm sure there's people out there who are hearing and going, well, what about X, Y, or Z? So those are all the landmines behind a good thing, right? And so we'll be purposeful to that means and try to make it fact. I think the issue of sustainability and what we do for opportunities for kids and how do we sustain that in the current 5-year forecast, the renewal piece is a critical part of the health of the district. So no new money, no new tax renewal, that as it sits today, is not subject to the changes in law and homestead exemption. So it's a good thing for the community and it allows us to sustain the trajectory of the 5-year forecast along all the grounds we're doing. And that this decision today, barring something catastrophe in the near future, won't modify that endpoint. And you're in a position to say, renewal, we'll wait for new money later. And I think that's been the mission from a financial perspective of this board and from what I've heard from the community, I hope. So I appreciate the confidence, I appreciate the support. There'll be some hard work, but we look forward to it. Thank you, Mr. Griffith, for your support and helping us guide us as we go along this path.